Chicago sidewalk. A pregnant black woman, Naomi, falls instead of help. Sergeant Halverston arrives, his face a mask of prejudice. Then, a vicious kick. He doesn't know the mayor's son is watching. Phone in hand, dialing his father, the city's about to explode. The July sun beat down on Ashland Avenue, its heat radiating invisible waves from the asphalt, the kind of Chicago summer day that made the air thick and heavy to breathe. Naomi Fields, 28 weeks pregnant and feeling every bit of the humidex, paused to shift the weight of her grocery bag. The scent of ripe peaches and plums a small comfort. She was on her way home, a short walk from the local market, her mind already on the community workshop she was organizing for the next evening. As a social worker, her days were filled with the city's unspoken struggles. But today, her thoughts were softer, centered on the gentle kicks of her unborn child and the sweet fruit she'd blend into a smoothie. She smiled, a hand instinctively going to her belly, a protective gesture that had become second nature. It was this moment of maternal reverie that was savagely interrupted. Her left foot caught the uneven edge of a buckled sidewalk slab, sending her off balance. The bag of fruit scattered, peaches rolling into the gutter, plums bruising on the grimy concrete. Naomi cried out, more in surprise than pain, as she stumbled, her hands flying out to break her fall. She managed to avoid landing directly on her stomach, her knees and palms scraping hard against the rough surface. A gasp escaped her lips as she tried to push herself up, her heart hammering against her ribs. That's when she saw the polished black boots approaching, stopping inches from her face. Attached to the boots was the imposing figure of a uniformed Chicago police officer, his face set in a scowl that seemed etched by years of cynicism. Sergeant Rick Halverston. His nameplate was stark against the dark blue of his shirt. "What do you think you're doing? Creating a public disturbance?" His voice was a gravelly bark devoid of any concern for her evident distress or her pregnancy, which was visible even as she lay sprawled. Naomi, still shaken, looked up at him, bewildered. I tripped. The sidewalk." "Tripped," Halverston sneered, his eyes, cold and dismissive, raking over her. "Or drunk, strung out. You people are always causing trouble in this neighborhood." The "you people" hung in the air, thick and poisonous, instantly clarifying the nature of his aggression. Naomi felt a cold dread seep into her, colder than the sweat cooling on her skin. She was black, pregnant, and in his eyes already guilty. "Officer, I'm pregnant. I just fell," she said, her voice trembling, slightly but firm. "I need to get up." Instead of offering a hand, Halverston's scowl deepened. "Pregnant? Huh. More like shoplifting and trying to make a quick getaway." He nudged one of the fallen peaches with the toe of his boot. "Where'd you steal these from?" Outrage surged through Naomi, momentarily eclipsing her fear. "I bought them from the market. I have a receipt." She gestured vaguely towards her spilled purse. Around them, a small crowd had begun to gather. Phones were already out, screens glinting in the harsh sunlight as people started recording. The sight of the officer towering menacingly over the fallen pregnant woman was a scene that demanded witness. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. "She's pregnant. He's not helping her. What's he doing?" Halverston seemed to swell under the attention, his aggression escalating. "Resisting? Are we lying to an officer?" He took a step closer, his shadow falling completely over Naomi. "I'm not resisting, I just want to get up," Naomi pleaded, her scraped hands pushing against the pavement. The baby chose that moment to kick hard, a sharp, sudden movement that made her wince. Then the unthinkable happened. With a guttural snarl, Halverston drew back his foot and kicked her. Not a nudge, not a shove, but a full, deliberate kick, the toe of his heavy boot connecting with her side, perilously close to her swollen abdomen. A collective, horrified shout erupted from the crowd. Naomi screamed, a raw, piercing sound of agony and terror, curling instinctively to protect her baby. Pain, sharp and blinding, tore through her. Among the onlookers, a young boy, no older than 12, stood frozen, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He clutched his own phone, not recording, but dialing. This was David, the mayor's son, out for an afternoon bike ride, now an accidental witness to a scene of brutal, inexplicable violence. His father's number was already on speed dial. As the crowd surged forward, shouting, David's small thumb pressed the call button, his voice a panicked whisper into the receiver. Dad, you won't believe what I just saw a policeman do. The scene on Ashland Avenue had devolved into chaos. Bystanders were yelling at Halverston, some trying to intervene, others ensuring their cameras captured every second. She's pregnant! You monster! A woman screamed. What is wrong with you? Another man bellowed, stepping forward, only to be met by Halverston's aggressive stance and a hand resting on his holstered weapon. Stay back, all of you! This is official police business! Halverston roared, his face flushed, a wild look in his eyes. He seemed to be feeding off the outrage, the challenge. He glanced down at Naomi, who was now sobbing, clutching her stomach. The vibrant colors of the scattered fruit, a cruel mockery of the joy they had represented only moments before. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, perhaps summoned by other onlookers, or perhaps by David's urgent, terrified call. Halverston, for the first time, seemed to register the sheer number of phones pointed at him, the raw fury in the eyes of the crowd, a flicker of something, not remorse, but perhaps self-preservation, crossed his face. He backed away a step from Naomi, his demeanor shifting slightly, attempting to regain a semblance of professional control, though the brutality of his act was seared into the minds of everyone present and, crucially, onto dozens of digital recordings. Naomi lay on the sidewalk, the sharp pains in her side now accompanied by a terrifying, cramping sensation in her lower abdomen. Her world had narrowed to the thumping of her own heart, the fear for her baby, and the echo of Halverston's boot. The sun still beat down, but everything felt cold. The vibrant sounds of the city street, the distant L train, the music from a passing car, the chatter of pedestrians, had been replaced by a cacophony of shouts, sirens, and her own ragged breaths. 2 more officers arrived, their expressions initially stern, then shifting to confusion and concern as they took in the scene a visibly pregnant black woman on the ground. A crowd of incensed citizens, and Sergeant Halverston, red-faced and defensive. What's going on here? Sergeant, one of the new arrivals asked, his eyes scanning the scene. Undoubtedly aware of the multiple cell phones still recording, Halverston gestured dismissively at Naomi. This woman was causing a disturbance, possibly under the influence, became aggressive. A wave of denials and angry shouts rose from the crowd. Liar! He kicked her, we all saw it. She just tripped, and he attacked her. She's pregnant, you animal. David, the mayor's son, still on the phone with his father, now spoke with a newfound boldness, his young voice cutting through the noise. He's lying, Dad. He kicked her right in the stomach. I saw everything. His words, amplified slightly by the phone, carried a weight that even Halverston couldn't ignore. The mention of Dad and the boy's unwavering certainty sent a ripple of unease through the responding officers. Naomi, through a haze of pain and fear, registered the boy's voice. A tiny, improbable flicker of hope ignited within her. Someone in power might know the truth from the very beginning, but that flicker was almost immediately extinguished by another wave of cramping. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, her primary focus narrowing to a single, desperate prayer. Please let my baby be okay. The dream of a peach smoothie, of a quiet afternoon, had been violently kicked into the gutter, replaced by a nightmare on a Chicago sidewalk, under the unblinking eyes of a horrified city. The wail of the ambulance siren was a shrill, disorienting scream that seemed to pierce right through Naomi's consciousness. Each rise and fall, a fresh wave of anxiety. She lay strapped to a gurney, the paramedics a blur of efficient movements and clipped, reassuring phrases that barely registered. The sharp, cramping pain in her abdomen was a relentless tormentor, a terrifying drumbeat counting down to an unknown fate for her child. Every jolt of the vehicle, every turn, sent fresh spasms through her, and with them, a cold, familiar dread that had little to do with the physical agony. It was the feeling of powerlessness, the suffocating weight of injustice, that transported her back, not just to the sun-baked sidewalk of Ashland Avenue, but further, to a dimly lit hospital corridor 7 years earlier. The smell of antiseptic, usually a scent of cleanliness and care, had, for her, become irrevocably tainted with the metallic tang of despair. Her brother, Marcus, had been 17 then, bright, funny, with a scholarship offer for engineering sitting on his desk. He'd been driving home from his part-time job at the library, his beat-up but beloved Honda Civic filled with textbooks and dreams. He never made it home. He was pulled over for a broken taillight, a taillight that had been perfectly fine when he'd left the house that morning. What happened next was pieced together from reluctant witness statements and a heavily redacted police report and an alleged furtive movement, a resisting arrest that no one who knew Marcus's gentle nature could ever believe. He'd ended up in this same hospital, Cook County, with a fractured skull and internal bleeding. The official story, a tissue of inconsistencies and veiled accusations. Naomi remembered her parents' faces, etched with a grief so profound it seemed to hollow them out from the inside. She remembered her own desperate, frantic efforts, then a young woman barely out of her teens, trying to get answers, to find justice. She'd talked to lawyers who sighed and spoke of uphill battles and the near impossibility of holding officers accountable. She'd attended community meetings, her voice shaking but determined as she recounted Marcus's character, his dreams, the blatant injustice of it all. She'd written letters, made calls, marched in protests that felt more like collective expressions of anguish than effective agents of change. The investigation, if it could be called that, had been a masterclass in bureaucratic deflection and institutional self-protection. The officers involved were cleared. The broken taillight became the irrefutable catalyst. Marcus's alleged resistance became the justification. He survived, but a part of him didn't. The spark in his eyes dimmed. The scholarship went unused. He became withdrawn, fearful, a shadow of his former self, forever looking over his shoulder. The system hadn't just broken his body, it had tried to break his spirit, and in many ways, it had broken Naomi's faith. That was when a certain kind of silence had settled over a part of Naomi, not a silence of cowardice, but one born of a harsh, painful understanding. She had seen, firsthand, how the truth could be twisted, how Black bodies could be devalued, how the very institutions meant to protect could become instruments of oppression. She learned that shouting into the void often left one hoarse and unheard. She'd endured the sneers of those who whispered that Marcus must have done something wrong, the pitying looks from those who thought her family should just move on, the sheer, crushing weight of a system that seemed designed to protect its own, regardless of the cost to citizens like her brother. So, she had channeled her grief and rage, not into futile, head-on collisions with an unyielding wall, but into her work. She became a social worker, dedicating herself to navigating the labyrinthine corridors of that same system, but from within, trying to make small, incremental differences in the lives of others who found themselves ensnared. She fought for housing, for healthcare, for educational opportunities for the marginalized. It was her form of resistance, a quieter, more strategic battle waged daily in the trenches of bureaucracy and societal indifference. She learned to pick her battles, to measure her words, to present her cases with irrefutable facts, knowing that any display of overt anger, however justified, would be used against her and her clients. This was the endurance, a constant, wearying awareness of the tightrope she walked, the careful negotiation of her existence in a world that often saw her color before her humanity. The attack on Ashland Avenue had ripped through that carefully constructed facade of professional composure. Halverston's boot hadn't just struck her body, It had struck at the heart of that old, unhealed wound. The casual cruelty, the blatant racism, the public humiliation. It was Marcus's story echoing in her own flesh. But this time, the target was not only her, but the impossibly vulnerable life she carried within her. A paramedic, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, checked her vitals again. "We're almost at Chicago Mercy. Honey, hang in there. You're doing great." Naomi squeezed her eyes shut, not from the pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming clarity of her resolve. The lessons from Marcus's ordeal were there, not as a blueprint for silent endurance, but as a testament to the cost of inaction, the price of allowing such brutality to go unchallenged. The old anger, the one she had so carefully managed and redirected for years, now surged, raw and unfiltered. This time, there were witnesses. This time, there was video. This time, the victim was a pregnant woman, a symbol of life and vulnerability that even the most cynical would struggle to vilify. She remembered the young boy on the sidewalk, his shocked face, his voice on the phone. "Dad, you won't believe what I just saw." Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered again. Perhaps this time, the narrative couldn't be so easily controlled, so easily twisted. As the ambulance doors swung open at the hospital's emergency entrance, the chaotic symphony of an urban trauma center enveloping her, Naomi made a silent vow. She would not be another Marcus, her story buried in redacted reports and quiet despair. She would not endure this silently. Her past, with its painful lessons of systemic failure, would not be a chain holding her down, but fuel. The world had watched Sergeant Halverston try to break her. Now, the world would watch her fight back. The fight for her baby's health came first, but the fight for justice would follow. And for that, she would not, could not, remain silent. Her voice, amplified by the chorus of witnesses and the irrefutable evidence of their phones, would be heard. The sterile environment of Chicago Mercy Hospital was a stark contrast to the chaotic vibrancy of Ashland Avenue. Naomi was admitted, prodded, scanned, and monitored with a professional, albeit impersonal, efficiency. The doctors and nurses were focused on the primary concern, the health of her unborn child. An obstetrician with a calm demeanor, Dr. Ramirez, finally delivered the news that the baby, a girl, was stable for now, her heartbeat strong, but the risk of premature labor was significantly elevated. Naomi would need strict bed rest for the foreseeable future, a constant state of vigilance. The relief was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the persistent, dull ache in her mind and the memory of Halverston's snarling face. As the initial medical crisis subsided, the next battle began to take shape. News of the incident, fueled by the dozens of viral videos, had exploded across the city and was rapidly gaining national attention. The footage was damning a uniformed officer, unprovoked, kicking a visibly pregnant black woman. Yet, the initial official responses felt like a carefully orchestrated exercise in damage control, designed to obscure rather than clarify. The Chicago Police Department issued a terse statement. "We are aware of an incident involving an officer and a citizen that occurred on July 15th. The officer involved has been placed on administrative desk duty pending a full investigation by the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, COPA. We are committed to transparency and a thorough review of the facts." Administrative desk duty. Not suspension, not condemnation. The words felt like a deliberate minimization, a bureaucratic shield. Naomi knew what pending a full investigation often meant from her brother Marcus's case, a slow, opaque process designed to exhaust and demoralize. The commitment to transparency rang hollow against the backdrop of her lived experience. Her phone, once she was able to focus on it, was a deluge of messages, concerned friends, outraged colleagues, and surprisingly tentative offers of legal help from civil rights organizations. News reporters were already calling the hospital, trying to get a statement. The story was a sensation, but Naomi quickly realized that becoming a viral victim was a double-edged sword. The narrative was already being subtly contested in comment sections and on certain news outlets. Whispers of "what did she do before the video started?" or "officers have a tough job. Let's wait for all the facts" began to surface. Insidious attempts to plant seeds of doubt, to dilute the stark reality of the assault. This was the covert discrimination she knew so well, the insinuation that a black woman, even pregnant and brutally attacked, must have somehow been culpable. When two COPA investigators, a tired-looking man and a younger woman with a notepad, came to her hospital room, their approach was meticulously neutral. They asked Naomi to recount the events, their questions precise, almost clinical. "Can you describe your actions leading up to the fall? Did you exchange any words with Sergeant Halverston before he approached you? Were you carrying any items that could have been misconstrued as a weapon?" Naomi, despite her pain and exhaustion, recounted the incident with clarity. Her voice steady, she described the uneven sidewalk, the spilled fruit, Halverston's immediate aggression and racist language. The kick, she emphasized that she had been cooperative, merely trying to get up. "We have Sergeant Halverston's preliminary statement," the male investigator said, his tone flat. "He claims you were acting erratically, shouting, and that he feared you might be reaching for something in your purse after you fell. He states he used a leg sweep to maintain distance and control the situation as you were, in his view, resisting his attempts to ascertain your condition." A cold fury washed over Naomi. A leg sweep. "He kicked me. He kicked my pregnant belly." It was a violent assault, not a leg sweep. Hundreds of people saw it. It's on video. "We are reviewing all available footage." The female investigator interjected smoothly. "Of course, videos don't always capture the full context, the officer's perspective, or what happened before recording began." There it was, the systemic exploitation. The attempt to frame the officer's actions within a procedural justification, however ludicrous. The subtle discrediting of undeniable video evidence by suggesting a missing context that might somehow excuse the brutality. Naomi felt a wave of weariness. This was the labyrinth she remembered, where truth was bent and official narratives were constructed to protect the institution, even the mayor's office. Despite the initial shock and the mayor's son being a key witness, seemed to be treading carefully. The mayor had issued a statement expressing his deep concern and promising a swift and just resolution, but he also emphasized the need to support our police officers and allow the investigative process to run its course. The political tightrope was evident. Naomi's community, however, was not waiting. Local activists she knew from her social work, church groups, and even strangers who had seen the videos began to organize. A GoFundMe page for her medical expenses and future childcare needs appeared, quickly gathering donations. Calls for Halverston's immediate firing and arrest grew louder. A protest was already being planned outside the 7th District Police Station where Halverston worked. This public support was a balm, but it also highlighted the chasm between community outrage and official inertia. One evening, a nurse quietly slipped her a card. "From some of us downstairs," she whispered. "We see what happened. Don't let them silence you." Inside, dozens of signatures from hospital staff offered messages of support. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. A crack of light in the otherwise grim official response. Naomi's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense black woman named Enika Adebayo, who had reached out after seeing the footage and hearing about Naomi through a mutual acquaintance in the activist community, was blunt. "They were going to try and drag this out, Naomi. They'll hope the public outrage dies down. They'll look for any speck of dirt on you, any past incident, anything to discredit you. Halverston will have the union lawyers, the department's unofficial protection. This won't be easy." "I know," Naomi said, her hand on her belly. "I lived through it with my brother. But this time, they kicked a pregnant woman in front of the whole world. And my baby is a fighter. So am I." The attempt to move forward was fraught with these hidden tripwires. Arranging for specialized prenatal care to monitor for complications was an added stress. Navigating insurance while on forced leave from work. The city's offer of victim support services felt like a hollow gesture when the perpetrator was still a city employee. Still, in essence, being paid by her tax dollars. The covert discrimination wasn't just in the sneering comments online. It was in the system's deliberate slowness, its inherent bias towards protecting its own, and the way it forced the victim to continually reassert the legitimacy of her trauma. It was exhausting, but every kick from her unborn daughter, every message of support, hardened her resolve. She wouldn't just be a passive victim in their narrative. She was preparing for a different kind of labor, one that would birth not only her child, but also a reckoning. Weeks bled into a month. Naomi's world had shrunk to the confines of her small apartment, where she was under strict orders for bed rest. The view from her window, a sliver of city park, children's laughter drifting up, felt like a taunt. Each day was a careful count of fetal movements, a meticulous adherence to medication schedules, and a growing, simmering frustration that gnawed at her. The official investigation into Sergeant Halverston's assault crawled at a glacial pace. COPA investigators had interviewed her again, their questions still circling the same tired points, hinting at her possible non-compliance, despite the mountain of video evidence showing an unprovoked attack. Halverston remained on desk duty, a paid employee of the city, while she, the victim, navigated a precarious existence, unable to work, her future uncertain. The city's narrative, subtly pushed by police union spokespeople and amplified by sympathetic media outlets, was coalescing around Halverston's split-second decision in a volatile situation and Naomi's supposed agitation. The term leg sweep was repeated ad nauseum, a ludicrous euphemism for a violent kick. The public outrage, while still present, was showing signs of the inevitable fatigue that sets in when official channels offer no swift, decisive justice. Naomi knew this pattern. It was the slow erosion of will, the grinding down of hope that the system relied upon. Anika Adebayo, her lawyer, was relentless, filing motions, demanding access to Halverston's disciplinary records, and preparing for a civil suit. But the legal process was a marathon, not a sprint, and Naomi felt a desperate need to reclaim her own voice, to shatter the carefully constructed official narrative with the unvarnished truth. The thought of waiting months, or even years, for some semblance of justice while her attacker drew a salary was intolerable. One afternoon, watching a news segment where a police union representative confidently defended Halverston's actions, citing his commendable record, Naomi felt something snap. The carefully managed patience, the strategic endurance she had cultivated for years, gave way to a surge of cold, clear anger. She reached for her phone, not to scroll through messages of support, but to initiate her first significant act of public defiance. She called Tanya Sharma, a respected investigative journalist with the Chicago Chronicle, known for her tenacity and her focus on social justice issues. Tanya had reached out weeks ago, offering a platform if Naomi ever wanted to speak directly. At the time, Naomi had hesitated, guided by Anika's advice to let the initial investigation unfold. Now, that caution felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. "Tanya," Naomi said, her voice low but firm when the journalist answered. "It's Naomi Fields. I'm ready to talk. On the record, no holds barred." Tanya, understanding the gravity, agreed immediately. They arranged for an interview at Naomi's apartment the following day, a video interview that would be streamed online and featured prominently in the Chronicle. Anika, initially wary of the potential legal ramifications, listened to Naomi's reasoning. "They are controlling the story, Anika," Naomi insisted. "They are painting me as an aggressor, as unstable. My silence allows that. I need to speak. For myself, for my daughter, for everyone they've tried to silence." Anika, seeing the steel in Naomi's eyes, relented, agreeing to be present during the interview. The next day, as Tanya and her camera person set up in Naomi's small living room, an unexpected tremor ran through the city's official channels. It started with an anonymous email. sent under heavy encryption to Tanya Sharma and a handful of other prominent Chicago journalists, as well as to several city aldermen known for their progressive stances. The email contained a link to a secure file-sharing service. Inside were scanned copies of Sergeant Rick Halverston's complete, unredacted personnel file from the Chicago Police Department. The documents were a bombshell, far from the commendable record touted by the Union. Halverston's file was littered with citizen complaints for excessive force, racial profiling, and verbal abuse, stretching back over a decade. There were multiple internal investigations, most of which had been closed with no finding of wrongdoing or a minor reprimand. But the sheer volume and consistency of the complaints painted a damning picture of a problematic officer shielded by a system designed to protect its own. Several complaints specifically mentioned his aggressive behavior towards women and his use of racist slurs. One particularly chilling report detailed an incident where Halverston had allegedly slammed a handcuffed black teenager's head against a squad car, an incident that was settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. The leak was perfectly timed, almost as if orchestrated by an unseen hand. As Tanya's phone buzzed with alerts from her newsroom about the breaking story of Halverston's leaked file, a grim understanding settled over them. Someone within the CPD, or with access to its deepest records, had decided that enough was enough. This wasn't just a random act, it was a targeted strike, a whistle blown from the heart of the blue wall of silence. The atmosphere in Naomi's apartment shifted. Her planned interview now had an explosive new context. Tanya, ever the professional, explained the development. Naomi, this changes things. Dramatically, your testimony, combined with this leak, could create a firestorm. A fierce, almost painful hope surged through Naomi. The unexpected aid. It wasn't a person she could see or thank, but their actions were a deafening roar against the official silence. She took a deep breath, her hand on her belly. Let's do it, she said. Let's light that fire. The interview was powerful. Naomi, propped up on her sofa, her pregnancy evident, spoke with a calm, unwavering dignity. She recounted the assault in detail. Her voice occasionally thick with emotion but never breaking. She didn't just describe the physical pain, but the humiliation, the terror, the blatant racism of Halverston's words. She directly addressed the leg sweep defense. A leg sweep doesn't send a pregnant woman to the hospital fearing for her child's life. A leg sweep is not what dozens of people filmed. It was a kick, a violent, hateful kick. She then spoke about her brother Marcus, her voice trembling slightly as she connected her past trauma to her present ordeal, illustrating a pattern of abuse and impunity. This isn't just about one officer, she stated, looking directly into the camera. This is about a system that allows men like Sergeant Halverston to operate with impunity. Year after year, complaint after complaint, until they escalate to the point where they feel comfortable kicking a pregnant woman in broad daylight. When Tanya brought up the newly leaked personnel file, Naomi nodded. I'm not surprised. I'm sure many people in this city who have had the misfortune of encountering Sergeant Halverston are not surprised. The question is, what will the city do now that the truth about his history, a history the department clearly knew about, is out in the open alongside the video of what he did to me? Her act of resistance, her decision to speak out, was now magnified 100-fold by the anonymous whistleblower. It was no longer just her word against the official story. It was her word, backed by irrefutable video, medical reports, the testimony of the mayor's son, and now, the department's own hidden records of Halverston's past. The narrative was ripped from the city's control. The carefully constructed defenses around Sergeant Halverston began to crumble, not under the slow grind of official investigation, but under the sudden, combined force of a victim's courage and an insider's conscience. The storm had truly begun. The combined impact of Naomi's televised interview and the bombshell leak of Sergeant Halverston's personnel file was instantaneous and incendiary. Chicago, a city with a long and fraught history of police misconduct and subsequent cover-ups, erupted. Protesters, galvanized by Naomi's calm, courageous testimony and the undeniable proof of Halverston's violent past, swelled outside the 7th District Station, City Hall, and police headquarters. The chants were no longer just general calls for justice. They were specific, fire Halverston now, jail racist cops, CPD, stop protecting abusers. The city's leadership, which had previously offered carefully calibrated statements and calls for patience, found itself scrambling. The narrative of a complex situation needing thorough investigation was shredded. The leaked file, authenticated by multiple sources within hours, proved the department knew Halverston was a problem. Naomi's articulate, humanizing account of her ordeal, broadcast directly into living rooms, stripped away any remaining ambiguity about the nature of the assault. The pressure cooker that was Chicago politics reached a boiling point. Aldermanic caucuses held emergency meetings. Community leaders, faith leaders, and civil rights groups issued unified demands. The police union's attempts to defend Halverston, now citing unverified documents and trial by media, sounded increasingly hollow and desperate against the tidal wave of evidence and public fury. The decisive shift came from an unexpected, though pivotal. Quarter Mayor Thompson, initially cautious, his public stance had been one of balancing support for law enforcement with concern for Naomi, but his son, David, had been unwavering. The boy, deeply traumatized by witnessing the brutality firsthand, had apparently given his father a detailed, emotional, and utterly convincing account that no amount of political spin could erase, coupled with the irrefutable video and now the leaked file. The mayor found his position untenable. More than that, sources close to him suggested he was genuinely appalled and, as a father, deeply affected. Within 48 hours of Naomi's interview and the leak, Mayor Thompson called an emergency press conference at City Hall. The room was packed, the atmosphere electric with anticipation, flanked by the police superintendent, a visibly grim-faced David Carter, and the head of COPA, Patricia Nwosu. The mayor stepped to the podium. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by a somber gravity. "Good morning," he began, his voice resonating through the tense silence. "We are here today because of a series of deeply disturbing events that have shaken our city and, frankly, challenged our conscience. I have seen the video of the incident involving Ms. Naomi Fields and Sergeant Rick Halverston. I have spoken at length with my son, who witnessed the event. I have been briefed on the contents of Sergeant Halverston's personnel file. Documents which, I must say, paint an extremely troubling picture of repeated alleged misconduct and a failure of internal accountability over many years." This direct acknowledgement of the leaked file's contents, before any official verification was complete, was a stunning departure from typical bureaucratic protocol. Superintendent Carter then spoke, his words stiff, his expression stony. "Effective immediately, Sergeant Rick Halverston has been suspended without pay. The Chicago Police Department has opened an internal affairs investigation that will run parallel to, but separate from, the COPA investigation. We are fully cooperating with the COPA and will provide all necessary information." He looked uncomfortable, his usual air of command diminished. But the real confrontation, the public flipping of the power dynamic, came when Patricia Nwosu of COPA stepped forward. Her agency, often criticized as slow and toothless, seized the moment. "The Civilian Office of Police Accountability," Nwosu announced, her voice clear and strong, based on the incontrovertible video evidence, the testimony of Ms. Fields, multiple eyewitness accounts, including that of David Thompson, and a review of the now public information regarding Sergeant Halverston's history of conduct, has today made a recommendation to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to pursue criminal charges against Sergeant Rick Halverston. These recommended charges include aggravated battery and official misconduct. Gasps and a flurry of shouted questions filled the room. This was it. Not just administrative action, but the formal recommendation for criminal prosecution. The system, so often a shield for officers like Halverston, was now being publicly wielded against him. Nwosu continued, directly addressing the core of the controversy. The initial claims of a leg sweep or that Miss Fields was non-compliant are not supported by the overwhelming evidence. The evidence clearly shows an unprovoked and brutal assault on a pregnant citizen. Furthermore, the historical data within Sergeant Halverston's own file, which COPPA is now also formally reviewing in its entirety, suggests a pattern of behavior that should have been addressed far more stringently, long before this incident. At her apartment, Naomi watched the press conference live on television, Anika Adebayo by her side. Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, bone-deep relief mixed with a steely satisfaction. The power dynamic hadn't just flipped, it had been shattered. Halverston, once the aggressor hiding behind his badge and a wall of institutional protection, was now facing the full weight of the city's legal apparatus, his career in ruins, his freedom in jeopardy. The witnesses were no longer just the stunned bystanders on Ashland Avenue. They were the anonymous whistleblower who had dared to expose the rot within, the journalists who had amplified the truth, the thousands of citizens demanding accountability. And now, the city's own leadership, forced by the undeniable evidence in the shifting political landscape to act. Reporters at the press conference hammered Superintendent Carter and Mayor Thompson with questions about how Halverston's pattern of behavior had been ignored for so long. "How many other Halverstons are on the force?" one reporter shouted. "What does this say about CPD's internal disciplinary process?" another demanded. The officials offered assurances of reform, of renewed commitment to oversight, but the damage to the department's credibility was immense. The power of Naomi's voice, amplified by the undeniable video and the damning internal records, had forced a public reckoning. It wasn't just Halverston on trial in the court of public opinion, and soon, potentially, in a court of law, it was the entire system that had enabled him. The confrontation was not a single, dramatic showdown in a courtroom yet, but this public dismantling of Halverston's defense, this official admission of his egregious conduct in the recommendation for criminal charges, felt like a decisive victory. Later that day, Anika received a call from the state's attorney's office. They confirmed they were fast-tracking the review of COPPA's recommendations and Halverston's leaked file. "They're taking this very seriously." "Naomi," Anika said, a rare smile on her face, "the evidence is just too overwhelming. The public pressure is too immense. Your courage in speaking out, combined with that leak, broke the dam." Naomi touched her belly, where her daughter was now a constant, reassuring presence. The fight was far from over, but a critical battle had been won. The power had shifted. The narrative was hers, and the city was finally, irrevocably, listening the wheels of justice, once prodded into motion by the sheer force of public outrage and undeniable evidence, began to turn with uncharacteristic speed. Within days of COPPA's recommendation, Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox announced her office was formally charging Sergeant Rick Halverston with aggravated battery, official misconduct, and perjury, the last charge stemming from his demonstrably false statements in his initial incident report, where he claimed Naomi was aggressive and that he had merely used a leg sweep. His bail was set at a significant sum, which he eventually posted, but his career as a Chicago police officer was unequivocally over. The police board moved for his termination, a process expedited by the mountain of evidence and the intense public scrutiny. The city held its breath. Such swift and decisive action against a police officer was rare. Naomi, still on bed rest but now a reluctant public figure, found herself at the center of a maelstrom of media attention and community support. Her story, the Ashland Avenue assault, became a rallying cry. Murals depicting a pregnant, resolute Naomi appeared on brick walls in Pilsen and Bronzeville. Vigils and baby showers of support were held outside her apartment building, with neighbors and strangers leaving diapers, baby clothes, and messages of solidarity. She was invited to speak via video link at community forums, her words carrying the weight of lived experience and newfound authority. The legal proceedings against Halverston were arduous. His defense attorney, funded by the police union, attempted every tactic motions to dismiss based on alleged procedural errors, attempts to discredit the viral videos as edited or taken out of context, and even veiled efforts to suggest Naomi's own actions had somehow contributed to the incident. But Anika Adebayo, Naomi's lawyer, was more than a match. She presented the evidence methodically, the crystal clear footage from multiple angles, the testimony of David Thompson, the mayor's son, whose composure on the stand was remarkably poignant, the damning contents of Halverston's leaked personnel file, and the medical reports detailing the risk to Naomi and her unborn child. One of the most powerful moments in the pre-trial hearings came when the prosecution introduced forensic analysis of the videos, which not only confirmed their authenticity, but also included a biomechanical expert's testimony. The expert demonstrated conclusively that the force and angle of the impact on Naomi's body were consistent with a deliberate, aggressive kick, not a defensive maneuver or a leg sweep. The defense's narrative crumbled under the weight of scientific and visual proof. Months later, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, if convicted by a jury likely to be deeply unsympathetic, Rick Halverston, a broken and bitter man stripped of his badge and his bravado, accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to aggravated battery and official misconduct. In exchange for the guilty plea, the perjury charge was dropped. But the sentence was still significant, 5 years in state prison. For many, it wasn't enough, but it was a conviction, a public admission of guilt, and a period of incarceration, a far cry from the usual outcome of administrative leave or a quiet resignation. The courtroom was packed on the day of his sentencing. Naomi was there, no longer on bed rest but heavily pregnant, her due date just weeks away. She chose not to give a victim impact statement herself, allowing Anika to read a prepared one. In it, Naomi spoke not of hatred or revenge, but of accountability and the need for systemic change. Mr. Halverston's actions were not just an assault on me and my unborn child, the statement read, but an assault on the trust that should exist between a community and those sworn to protect it. My hope is that this outcome will serve as a clear message that such abuses of power will not be tolerated, and that it will encourage those within the system who see wrongdoing to have the courage to speak out, just as someone courageously did in my case. The reference to the anonymous whistleblower was clear. The community reaction was a complex mix of relief, vindication, and a renewed determination to push for broader reforms. The Ashland Accords, as some activists informally dubbed the wave of changes that followed, were significant. Mayor Thompson, facing an upcoming election and seeing the political tide shift, championed a series of police reform measures and overhaul of the CPD's early warning system for problematic officers, increased funding and true independence for COPA, and mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias training that went beyond mere lip service. The City Council, under immense public pressure, passed an ordinance strengthening civilian oversight of the police department. The anonymous whistleblower, whose identity was never officially revealed, but who was lauded as a hero by activists, had sparked a revolution from within. Several weeks after Halverston's sentencing, Naomi gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Hope. The aftermath was not a simple fairy tale ending. The scars, both physical and emotional, remained for Naomi. The systemic issues of racism and police brutality in Chicago and across the nation were not eradicated by one conviction. But something had undeniably shifted. Naomi Fields, the community social worker who had endured the system's indifference with her brother and then faced its brutality herself, had become an unlikely but powerful symbol of change. She hadn't sought the spotlight, but she hadn't shied away from it when it found her. She eventually returned to her work, but with a new platform and a new purpose. She established a small nonprofit, the Hope Initiative, dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and advocating for restorative justice practices. She used her story, not to dwell on her own trauma, but to empower others, to educate, and to push for continued reform. The image of the racist cop kicking a pregnant black woman had shocked the city's conscience, but the image that endured, the one that inspired, was of Naomi Fields, mother of hope, standing tall, her voice clear and strong, demanding and helping to build a more just future. The sidewalk on Ashland Avenue, once a scene of brutal violence, became, in the city's collective memory, the starting point of a painful but necessary awakening, a testament to the fact that even in the face of entrenched power, the courage of one, amplified by the many, could indeed flip the dynamic and plant the seeds of justice.